I appreciate it. Yeah. Okay, well, you all know that you are in the right place now because of the slide. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. And I am going to, there we go. I want to introduce the people who are going to be speaking to you before we start and let you know who they are. And then I will turn it over to them and they can talk to you about what they've done. So in alphabetical order, no order of importance. And I'm not making any judgments here. Our first speaker, all three of our speakers work at the Urban School in San Francisco, which is an independent school. Amanda Moore is a poet, educator, and editor. And when not developing and implementing courses in literature and creative writing for high school students at the Urban School, she serves as poetry co-editor at Women's Voices for Change and a reader at Vita Review and Bull City Press. Her debut collection of poetry called Requeening was selected for the 2020 National Poetry Series by Ocean Vuong, and her essays and poems have appeared widely in journals and anthologies. Thank you, I appreciate that, Lingerr, the celebration, that was warranted. Okay, our second speaker is Courtney Rein. Is it Rein or Rein? Am I saying that right, Courtney?
It's Rein, but most people don't get it right, so.
I'm sorry.
You're in good company.
I'm thoroughly average right now. Courtney Rein is an educator who believes in building more democratic classrooms from high school to adult ed in prisons. She is committed to planting seeds of collective accountability, especially through collaborations that transform individuals and communities. And our third speaker, and this is the person who I knew to invite, and so she's the reason that I first was able to meet Amanda and Courtney, is Lingerr Senghor. Lingerr teaches high school English and journalism at the Urban School and has taught at the Drew School in California, which is why I have a connection to her, and Phillips Academy at Andover. She is an avid activist, retired Victorianist, tireless football fan. That is definitely true. She is tireless, proud Gambian, and Marvel nerd. So those are your three speakers. We're going to talk to you today about creating a course in Nigerian literature at their school and potentially for your school. So I will turn it over to you three. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. I just realized we didn't say who's going to talk about this slide. So I'll just start. All right. So welcome to our panel, our conversation, our interactive experience of teaching Nigerian lit at our school. And we're just going to start off with introducing ourselves. So I can go first. Retired Victorianist sounds so ominous. It's just that we don't teach Victorian literature at Urban. I was kind of forced into retirement. So I'm Lingerr, like Shane said. I've taught this course once with Amanda during the pandemic, and I'm from the Gambia, West Africa, and my pronouns are she, her.
Courtney, do you want to go next since I'm going to slide into the next one?
Oh, good call. Good call. I don't know what I could add to what Shane said. I'm Courtney Rein. I'm an East Coaster by birth. I've been out in California for 16 years, teaching high school for 21 years. And I got to be part of the creation of this course and have taught it twice. And my greatest sort of sadness is that I didn't get to be in on the last iteration of it with Lingerr and Amanda. I'll leave it at that.
I'm Amanda. I've been at the Urban School for 10 or 11 years and teaching this course. I guess I'm the only one of the three of us. I've taught it all of the iterations. So I got to teach it twice with Courtney and once with Lingerr online completely, which I think we rocked despite the circumstances. And I'm also going to introduce the picture at the top, which is the Urban School where we work. I think it's really important to contextualize. I love that we said it was an independent school. We're a private school.
Thank you. I was trying to stick with the party line, but having taught in a private school, it's a private school.
It is a private school and it is the party line, but we are a majority white institution. And while we are deeply, deeply committed both programmatically and curricularly to a lot of diversity and identity studies, I just think it's an important context that we're also very well funded and really supported to do the work that we're doing. And just to give you a sense of what we're going to do today, we've done one already. We're just clipping through here. We're going to talk about some of our objectives with both this presentation and this course. We're going to look at one text that we use, talk a little bit about our experiences developing it, why we developed it and how, and then some good meat and potatoes. We're going to go over content, which is much more than things fall apart. We'll share some of our assignments and we'll take questions. And if there's time and you want to reflect on what you're getting out of this or how you might bring it to your school, we have time for that too.
And just so you know, a lot is going to be happening. You're going to get a lot of different information. We're going to send this presentation in a folder of resources after the panel is over to people who came, or we'll put it on the website or whatever, very accessible to everyone. I tried to not put too many proverbs in this, because it sometimes feels problematic to sort of make everything African about proverbs, but I do love proverbs. So I think when you plant a yam, it produces another yam, really sort of guided us in this and sort of thinking about what do we want from this? How do we want other teachers to be able to do similar things if they want to? So now we're going to talk a little bit about just teaching the class from our different positionalities. And what we're asking you as well is just, what is your positionality? What parts of your identity are activated or engaged as you hear about or read Nigerian literature? So I guess I can go first since I'm already speaking. So I'm Gambian. I've been at Urban for 4 years. I'm Gambian American. And I approached the course, I didn't realize it even really existed until my second year. And a few of the emotions I had approaching it were curiosity, because it seemed so random and so cool, tinged with concern because of how reductive perspectives on the continent of Africa can be, or on individual countries. And what I found was so much joy, first of all. It was really amazing, despite the pandemic. But also liberation. And I think for myself, as a Black person who lives in America, it felt like a break from what we sometimes focus on in African-American literature, which is racial oppression. It felt like so many points in this class, I got to be separated. There's just nothing about white people. There's nothing about whiteness. And that was really exciting for me. Amanda and Courtney, you want to talk about yours?
I can use the whiteness transition that Lingerr just offered us. As you may notice, Amanda and I are both white ladies, both American. And I think, we had a whole different kind of curiosity than Lingerr. That was what drew us to the class. You'll hear a little bit more about that later. But, I think we had deep yearning and deep trepidation about taking on a course about Nigerian lit. And you'll hear all the ways that we kind of tried to contend with that trepidation and that awareness of where we might make really false steps. And also, I think we were both sort of saddled with an awareness of we didn't even know how badly we could get it wrong. So despite that, I think we had this sense of both like excitement and a sense of responsibility that this was, especially given the school population we work with, especially given where each of us had come from as white women teachers, this was a real opportunity for us to learn. And I think, as I said as Shane said in the intro, like our school really allows us to be, as teachers, modeling learning, modeling being a lifelong learner. And so I know Amanda and I talked a lot about at the beginning, this is really a chance for us to model that, not to be the expert in the room, but actually to kind of show students and walk with students along the path of how do we know what we know? How can we learn? How can we recognize when we're making even mistakes and how we're learning? So that's a part and parcel, I think, of my positionality. Amanda, what do you want to add?
I would only add that neither one of us has stepped a foot on the continent of Africa, and that this is part of a larger teaching practice. I teach Latin American literature. We're often teaching outside of identities and experiences that we have firsthand knowledge of, and yet we do so with as much awareness and sensitivity as we can, but also this real commitment to it's important for someone to be bringing this literature to classes and to our school, and that we were willing to make the missteps, hopefully not as many of them, but that we felt a real sense of responsibility to bring this literature, even if we're not always the perfect teacher to do so.
And we're going to talk about our objective, but just to add to mine, there just wasn't space. Gambian, but for some reason, almost all of my uncles are Nigerian. So I had some exposure to Nigeria before we started teaching the class.
And Lingerr's Nigerian uncles were a huge part of the iteration I taught.
Okay, so I mean, Our objective is to reflect on and explore our course, to help teachers imagine something similar in their curriculum. And by similar, we don't mean you can teach, here are the exact steps to teach Nigerian literature exactly how we taught it. Really anything you're interested in. Of course, Nigeria is not the sole representation of Africa, right? But how can some of the broader questions and concerns we engage with be applied to different things that you're all doing? And we'll do that in a bunch of different ways. We'll talk about what Nigerian Lit offers. We'll talk about our experiences creating and teaching. We'll talk about really just, like we said, the meat and potatoes, the nuts and bones, whatever, of what our course looked like. And then like at the end, we'll have time to discuss what could this look like at your institution. And then this was like the very practical objective. And this is the heart objective, I think. So this is what a student wrote from my class after we taught Nigerian Lit. And I'll read it. When I first saw Nigerian literature on my list of course selections, I have to say I didn't take it into consideration as a subject I might actually enjoy. Although it's embarrassing to think about, I don't think I really believed Nigeria had much to offer me in terms of interesting literature, so I marked it down as a second choice. After taking the class and taking time to reflect on the prejudice that allowed me to make such assumptions about Nigeria, I've realized this really should have been my first choice from the beginning. Despite Urban's attempts at broadening the range of viewpoints that constitute my curriculum, I feel that I've allowed myself to put up a sort of wall to the rest of the world. What Nigerian Lit has done is provided the sledgehammer to begin breaking it down. I love how aggressive that is. It would be arrogant and incorrect to say that this class has completely reshaped my worldview and that I am now unprejudiced, but I feel as though I've taken the first steps. And that's maybe the heart of what we're talking about. What are the first steps that we can take? How can we start to take down these walls that so many of us have about the continent of Africa or about Nigeria?
So we thought we would start actually with one of the some excerpts from one of the texts that we read in the course, and it's one we start with. Ironically, Binyavanga Wainaina was a Kenyan writer, and one of the publications he used to publish in is a one called Africa as a Country, which is it sort of publishes a lot of writing on and around the African left. And so he writes this piece. This was published in Granta. He also has some great stories on the moth, if you ever listen to the moth. But we started, for Amanda and I, when we were first imagining this course, this piece, which surfaces so many of the assumptions and stereotypes that the Western world writers and readers make about the continent of Africa. It became this sort of like searchlight for us. We would return to it. It's almost like a checklist of what do we make sure we're not doing this, right? And so we'll read a couple of sections from it. And actually, I meant to share, when we read it with students, one of the things that in the past we've done with this piece is actually used it as a kind of springboard for students to then write a collective class kind of manifesto about how to read about Nigeria in a way that helps us all, just as before we've even really started reading any of the literature, to be really aware of what do we want to be on the lookout for in ourselves, just given where we're coming from and all the tropes and all the kind of falsehoods that we've been fed and conditioned into, just by virtue of living in America. So we have 4 little slides worth of selections. And this would be a moment, do we feel like a group where someone would volunteer to read the first slide? That would involve unmuting yourself. And maybe we could have a little collective voice chorus. Is there somebody who's willing to take on the first slide? I'm doing my best looking at Jeffrey. Thank you.
Okay, opening. Always use the word Africa or darkness or safari in your title. Subtitles may include the words Zanzibar, Maasai, Zulu, Zambezi, Congo, Nile, big, sky, shadow, drum, sun, or bygone. Also useful are words such as gorillas, timeless, primordial, and tribal. Note that people means Africans who are not Black. Well, the people means Black Africans. Never have a picture of a well-adjusted African on the cover of your book or in it, unless that African has won the Nobel Prize. An AK-47, prominent ribs, naked breasts, use these. If you must include an African, make sure you get one in Maasai or Zulu or Dogon dress.
Thank you. Anyone up for the second slide? Thanks, Amy.
In your text, treat Africa as if it were one country. It is hot and dusty, with rolling grasslands and huge herds of animals and tall, thin people who are starving. Or it is hot and steamy, with very short people who eat primates. Don't get bogged down with precise descriptions. Africa is big, 54 countries, 900 million people who are too busy starving and dying and warring and emigrating to read your book. The continent is full of deserts, jungles, highlands, savannas, and many other things. But your reader doesn't care about all that, so keep your descriptions romantic and evocative and unparticular.
Thanks, Amy. We've got two more. We have another taker out there. Natasha, thanks.
Taboo subjects, ordinary domestic scenes, love between Africans, unless a death is involved. References to African writers or intellectuals, mention of school-going children who are not suffering from yaws or Ebola fever or female genital mutilation. Your African characters may include naked warriors, local servants, diviners, and seers, ancient wise men living in hermitic splendor, or corrupt politicians, inept polygamous travel guides, and prostitutes you have slept with.
All right, who's up for? Thank you, Natasha, for the last of Why Nine is Beautifully Ironic commentary. Morgan, thanks.
Broad brushstrokes throughout are good. Avoid having the African characters laugh, or struggle, or educate their kids, or just make do in mundane circumstances. Have them illuminate something about Europe or America and Africa. African characters should be colorful, exotic, larger than life, but empty inside, with no dialogue, no conflicts or resolutions in their stories, no depth or quirks to confuse the cause. Always end your book with Nelson Mandela saying something about rainbows or renaissances, because you care.
Thanks, Morgan. Thanks to all of you for bringing that to life.
This is what we did, as Courtney was saying. We read this. At first, some of the students didn't actually realize it was satirical, and they were like, what is this racist propaganda you're making us read? So this is obviously satirical. This is obviously a heavy critique on how Africa has been portrayed in other kinds of literature. We read this, like Courtney was saying, they came up with their own sort of guidelines to talk about Nigeria. And the next thing we did when we started our class was really just checked in with each other. What do you know about Nigeria? And we're gonna ask all of us to do this, right? I mean, we're such a variety of different people. So what are things you know or should know or know that you don't know? Let's take about a minute and everyone can do that and just send them to the chat and we can just look at what we know about Nigeria. Yeah, we have most populous country in Africa, huge film industry. We all know Nollywood, hopefully. It's in West Africa, many ethnic groups and languages, general divisions geographically. What else? What is everything you know? When Nigerian comes to mind, what do you think of? A difference between urban and rural areas, Igbo and Yoruba, British colony, Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, Abuja, the Biafran War, a Muslim-Christian split, Lagos, jollof rice.
Oh, that's a controversial one for Lingerr.
It's not controversial for me. All I'm saying is that I'm from the Jollof people in Senegal and the Gambia, so it's our dish. Half of a yellow sun, shout out to Half of a Yellow Sun. Fela Kuti, of course.
I see Birthplace of Achebe.
The Birthplace of Achebe, fantastic. So
this is already 3 times the length of any list we get from our students.
Exactly. We get a lot of tentative in Africa. So this is what we started off with. And I think Amanda and Courtney both pointed out the importance of us learning collectively. So they felt like there's a kind of humility in stating what we didn't know or the few things we knew about such a vast space, even for the 3 of us as teachers. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, of course. So now we're just going to go into a little bit about how our course came about. So I'm going to turn it over to I think Amanda, but I don't remember.
I think I'm going to take this one. So we're just going to briefly touch on the origins of this course, because I think it's important. We think it's important to name why a white dominant school all of a sudden had the kind of hubris to take on Nigerian lit. And Lingerr, actually, will you go to the next slide? Because that has the more sort of facts and figures of it. It really actually came out of an institutional kind of push around recognizing the need for particularly, the students that we're teaching to have a greater awareness around global issues and becoming global citizens, that there's a responsibility that they all have. And when it came down to how our department might intersect with that more institutional goal, that came both from our internal awareness and the accreditation group WASC. We were really aware, I think, as we were sort of doing an inventory of our department, that we had no literature from the continent of Africa in our curriculum. So, we've looked and talked, and in general, we tend to approach things at Urban from a depth over breadth kind of philosophy. And so trying to create, an African literature course is not really in line with how we look at things. We often will offer an entire course on one author, Toni Morrison, William Faulkner. We often will go a deep dive into like a time period, like the Harlem Renaissance. We actually have a course that's only the novel Homegoing by Jesse. So we were thinking about, which, and we'll talk why we chose Nigeria a little bit later. But in terms of, you'll see that, the process started in 2015. We went through, we proposed the course, lots of different constituencies had input on it. Students did, our department, admin, other faculty. And then we've taught it, as we've mentioned now, 3 times since 2016 when we piloted it. And the most recent time was during the pandemic last fall. So you'll notice, I think there's like a little tinge of sadness about that 3rd iteration, and also great joy because it was the first that Lingerr was involved in. So I think all of us are looking forward to iteration number 4, which will be, knock on wood, in person and with all of us. So I think that's now here we are in 2021, but that's the last 6 years is sort of the evolution we're going to look at.
And in addition to satisfying, something in the English department, wanting to broaden our lens, we also, as a school, are looking at developing global citizens, and using global literature to do that is really important. Our service learning director gave us this wonderful quote that became a little bit, again, one of those touchstones or guiding lights. This is the definition of global citizenship from Daisaku Ikeda of Soka Gakkai International, who says, "The wisdom to perceive the interconnectedness of all life and living, the courage not to fear or deny difference, but to respect and strive to understand people of different cultures and to grow from encounters with them, the compassion to maintain an imaginative empathy that reaches beyond one's immediate surroundings and extends to those suffering in distant places." And I would add that when Courtney and I first were playing with this quote, we wanted to also say that it's not just suffering, but thriving and enjoying in ways that might look really different from our experiences. So that imaginative empathy, we needed to extend that to joyous celebrations. And I think Lingerr spoke briefly to how different that is from some of the texts that we read in our department.
And when it comes to why we chose Nigeria, honestly, it became kind of clear to us, almost like Nigeria chose us. And I think there's the history of contact that already exists from across the African diaspora between Nigeria, from West Africa in general, and the United States. I think the other thing that was incredibly appealing to us is, not that this is limited to Nigeria, but the incredible breadth of culture, of peoples, of languages. And this was really, in some ways cemented it, that especially in like 2015, when we were beginning this process, I think it was actually about the same year that Cassava Publishing started, which was just this incredible conduit of Nigerian literature coming into American bookstores. And so, it already had the widest availability of particularly high school accessible literature. And in the last 6 years, it's just become more and more accessible. So that's really, that was, Nigeria kind of became, at least I think in my mind, Amanda, I think you probably questioned me more and asked harder questions, but it seemed to me, I was like, oh, this is the place.
Well, I think some of what we were concerned about is answered by what is this place? But as two white ladies, and one of the reasons that Courtney and I are the ones talking right now is that this was our process without Lingerr's enthusiasm and without, this was us feeling our way through what are we doing and how do we do it. So here were some concerns and how we addressed them. One, we absolutely knew we were trying to disrupt. So the Wainaina gives us this idea of, and even that quote about global citizenship, we needed to disrupt all of the notions that we're cooking within ourselves and within our students. But what is our authority as non-Africans with no ties to the continent or to the country, which you've heard us say we really had to center our positionality as something that we were constantly thinking around and through. And that, maybe seems a no-brainer, but in a classroom to really deconstruct the hierarchy and position ourselves almost on the same level as students, as co-learners, which is one of the other things we were thinking about. How do we co-author this course with them and allow our stumbles to coincide with their stumbles? How can we lead one another through this? And then also, most importantly, how do we get proximate? How do we get as proximate as we can from San Francisco? We obviously are not going to go there. We're not going to take our 3 sections of students there. But how do we develop materials that aren't through our lens? And we were able to seek expertise. And this is something that I'm so thrilled about, that every community I've ever been in has all of these little communities of expertise if you know where to look. But we had the good fortune of working with Mfoniso Udofia, who we'll talk a little bit about later. She's a playwright, a Nigerian playwright, who happened to be putting on a play from her UFOT cycle in our city. And when we reached out and talked to her about this project, we were able to establish this long-term conversation around texts and to have, someone Nigerian helping us through these texts. So it wasn't just here's what we think we should be reading, but really to share that. We had Rotimi Agbabiaka, who's this fantastic Nigerian actor, who was able to come in and talk not just about playing different roles from Nigeria and from elsewhere, but about his life as somebody. He grew up in Mississippi. He's queer. He had so much to share with our students about identity that it didn't have to be attached to a curricular goal to just have him in the classroom and give our students proximity. And then Simi Adebajo, who opened the fabulous Eco Kitchen, we were able to use our school's resources to support her fledgling catering company. We worked with MOAD, the Museum of African Diaspora, which we'll talk a little bit about as an assignment later. But as much as possible, turning over our authority to people with actual authority and using the resources of our school to support and find those were all concerns we had to address. And by really dealing with them head on and acknowledging them, it made the class much stronger from the get-go.
We're just flashing this early course description really as almost a reminder to ourselves and to anybody taking on a project like this, that wherever you start, everything will change. And just that commitment to letting go of whatever you might have imagined a course or a new unit might look like. And that if we put this up here and, I think maybe 1 or 2 sentences from this course description ended up in the actual course description. We had names that we knew already. We left those behind in favor of all these new authors and culture mavens whose work we brought into this course. And so I think even the last bit about, what we thought we were going to be exploring in the course changed enormously over the course of our research and then over the course of teaching the course over and over again. So just a reminder to all of us, whatever you think it will be, let it change, let it evolve, let it shift.
And I'm excited because we're almost getting to Lingerr, refreshing our course. But I just wanted to flash this up, a snippet from our early process. So back and forth in Google Docs as we were really, it took a lot of time to sort through texts that we were getting from Mfoniso Udofia, that we were finding on our own. And you can just see the conversation. It was so important to have somebody else to work on this with, to talk back and forth. This is working, this is not working, we definitely can't use this. Oh, I hope we can use this. That conversation was really important, and a lot of trial and error, and also made us feel a little more knowledgeable. So I might not have brought any of these texts that I read into my classroom, but I learned from just the act of preparing them.
And then we kind of got to where we are now. And even though Courtney and I didn't co-teach this, it feels like it's been a conversation between the three of us and so many other people in figuring out our most recent iteration of the class. So here's just some of the essential questions that we wanted to approach with students to explore. One is, how can literature be a vessel for history, a way into history, a response to and negotiation with history? How does this literature reflect the tensions between original, colonial, post-colonial, post-post-colonial influences? How do literary voices emerge, inform style and perspective in ways that reflect the larger culture? How do they defy the larger culture, question it, and even shape it? How does this literature offer us a vision of what it means to be a global citizen, historically and now in capital letters? And these are just 4 of them. We have a bunch of other essential questions. And as you can probably notice, there's nothing about Nigeria in any of them, right? The point is that this should be about any sort of class you're interested in that is global in some way, that offers a global perspective. So what we'd love to hear is just a few responses. I mean, as you read these 4 questions, or even from what any of us have shared so far, what resonates with you? And also maybe what about these questions connect to any course or assignment that you've engaged in your career? So let's take a moment to think about it, and then you can actually just unmute yourself and share, or you can send to the chat if you prefer.
It's, looking at that question on the lower left about literature reflecting tensions between the various eras of a society's development, something I've taught a similar African literature course at the secondary level. And I run into the challenge of giving students enough to work with before we do the deconstruction. If that makes us thinking about, to do post-colonial, there needs to be some colonial, but it's irresponsible to do colonial without doing original, right? And a lot of these courses have been team taught, and what I've noticed, and I wonder if you had this happen to you, that teachers we get excited, we get far along, we teach multiple iterations of the course, and then suddenly we're getting excited about deconstructing and getting into post-colonial, and the students are still, like, where's Nigeria again? Like, what? We sort of get ahead of ourselves, but it's hard I've done both trimester and semester length courses, and to get through enough material to get where I want to get. I almost need to do 101, 102, 103.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've found as well. We have 12 weeks. It could take 12 weeks to just talk about the first iteration of colonization in Nigeria, right? So I think that, one of the things we start with is even just looking at maps of Nigeria and looking at different breakdowns of ethnic groups and education and wealth and all these things to try and get that sense. But there is a feeling that it's always lacking in ways that we need to just name to even look at these literatures. And then Shane sent to the chat, I think the question about literary voices define culture is important because it's a reminder that people in all places question and challenge their cultures. Absolutely. Any other thoughts?
I like the first question. How can literature be a vessel for history? So I have not had the pleasure of teaching any Nigerian literature, but I have read quite a bit of it. And I know I'm thinking of Half the Yellow Sun, and how I knew very little about the Biafra War. I'd never heard of it, actually. And I learned so much just from that text. So as teachers, we know the power of literature and how, it just kind of threads into other subject areas. So, yeah.
And we also have a recommendation. So I'm going to write that down. Nervous Conditions. Awesome.
We used to teach that at Urban, actually.
Oh, really?
It used to be in 1A Lingerr. Yeah.
What?
It's true. It's true. But I agree that Half a Yellow Sun comment, we don't have time in a trimester course to read that, but we do watch the movie. And just for that same reason, that vessel of history, there's so much history, and we're very clear that we're trying to approach this through a literature lens. But of course, even as Jeffrey's pointing out, sometimes you can't get there. You can't get to the full immersion in the literature without a little bit of the history, a little bit of the context, a little bit of that 101 or 102. And Half a Yellow Sun is brilliant for that. It's been a really useful part of the course.
Absolutely. And so Amy says, this is the first year that They won't teach houseboy because I've always worried about discussing African literature characters solely in terms of European white interactions. Absolutely. And of course it happens because it's part of the history, but what is the history of Blackness outside of whiteness, right? I think across the board, sometimes we actually don't get into that as much. And The Fisherman is heartbreaking, yes, okay. So what we're gonna do right now is take a very quick break. We're about to dive right into, here's what we taught, here's what we asked students to do. What do you think? Time for more questions. So it's 2:08 my time. Let's take about 4 minutes. Let's come back at 2:12 my time. So whatever that is for your time, you can put off your video, you can go use the bathroom, get some water. I'm gonna run and grab my computer charger. All right, see you in 4 minutes. My computer's just gonna die mid-sentence.
That would be no good.
All right. Well, so now, and I'm really appreciating everything that's happening in the chat with some questions and recommendations for books. I'm excited to talk about all of that. But let's dive in with our content.
Yeah, so, and also before that, if you came a little bit late, if you realized against your will you've been named Ben Austen, you can click the 3 dots in your profile. You might have to figure out which Ben Austen you are and actually change it to your real name. But to the 6 Ben Austens in the room, we're glad you're all here, Ben Austen. One of them is my little brother, by the way. Hello, Sidar.
Oh, how exciting.
All right, so even though we did say we were working beyond Achebe, it's important to note that we do include that as sort of a seminal text in the class. And part of that is because so many of the pieces that we read afterwards, short stories and novels, are speaking back to this literature in some way. So we read it, and it's true that some kids have encountered it in middle school, but we do a much different approach to it and use it as sort of a way to enter, what do we need to look up? How do we contextualize literature for ourselves? And we also do Death and the King's Horseman, which for me has been one of the most rewarding texts to teach both. And I think there's an interesting conversation Amy was bringing up in the chat about, how do we bring up proximity to whiteness? How do we talk about colonialization? We, Courtney and I set out to do as little of that as possible. How do we get as much of the Europeanization and sort of white influence out of the text, but it's so important in this play. And the performances of this play have been really exciting to talk about. And I think that we have a film adaptation coming, which makes it even more exciting to include. So those are the 2 texts I'll talk about.
Yeah, Man and I were just watching an interview with Wole Soyinka, and he was talking about that film adaptation. Speaking of films, we actually, it's interesting, Shane put in the chat that, short stories are a really helpful way both to get historical context and also to try and diversify voices, because that was a huge part of our goal. And so this October 1960 film, which is pretty recent, 2014, I think it won a couple of big awards actually, was an attempt to give both a little insight into Nollywood, but also to look at Nigerian independence. And we only watched it honestly the first time because I think we weren't quite sure that it did what we wanted to do, but it's part of that bigger experimentation. And News from Home, which is a series of short stories. I think the reason we actually chose a couple of stories from there is that Sefi Atta is one of actually very few Nigerian writers who is drawing from, I shouldn't say that, few writers that I know, and I know Mfonisa Udofia is concerned, is like, it's hard to find voices from the North. And so I think we also lost most of the Sefi Atta stories, but those were 2 reasons why we were sort of at the beginning bringing those 2 texts in.
And we then read The Thing Around Your Neck by Adichie, who is, of course, incredible. And at this point, I think a lot of our students might be a little familiar with her because of that famous TED Talk, The Dangers of a Single Story. But I like to introduce her as the person who Beyonce uses in her Flawless video. The students all definitely know that part. And The Thing of Your Neck, it's a series of very different kinds of short stories. And what I enjoy about it, it gets to a few of the voices or topics we don't talk about. For example, interactions with the Hausa tribe, which we don't see as much in our course. It's also really exciting because one of those stories, I think the final story in the anthology directly responds to and engages with Chinua Achebe. So we get to see this intergenerational conversation that, of course, our students are having just by existing and talking to a lot of older people. So they get to see that sort of reflected. We also watch the film Half of a Yellow Sun, like I think Amanda was saying. And then Amanda, do you want to talk about the plays?
Sure, or Courtney can. I mean, we were so lucky to get Mfoniso Odofia's plays, which now are available. I think you can actually buy the scripts, but when we first found her, she was producing the very first one at the Magic Theater here. So it's not something we had intended to read or to look at, but this is like an opportunity to seize this contact. And for a while before the pandemic, she was releasing a new play and it was being staged in San Francisco at the same time that we were teaching the class. So we were able to get students to see, and actually Courtney, I can't remember why I couldn't go, but you got to go one night with students and meet her face to face, if you want to talk about that. But it really, that is an important sort of opportunistic element of our course, that whatever was happening, we were determined to pull it into the classroom.
And I would actually, I would just, oh, sorry, Lingerr, go ahead. I just will finish off about the UFO cycle, that she was really, I was actually this morning reading through the email correspondence we've had with her, and she was one of the real forces, I think, at liberating us from even just text as content in the course. And she was really pushing us in super exciting ways towards music and towards, all these things that maybe like wouldn't have traditionally been in an English course, and that ended up being part of the richest, I think, some of the richest material. And I was just remembering that we saw In Old Age together, met her, and then our students were actually writing papers, and they really wanted to be able to quote the play they had seen. And so she shared, I was looking at this too, she shared the most recent version of In Old Age, and she said, and you can see all the track changes for all the ways I'm changing it. So I think, what was beautiful about that is just a sense of this is all very alive. Sort of like Shane was saying, like interrogating your culture, creating culture, that it's all alive and she's working with it. And students had that sense that isn't just fixed in the same way that their sense of Nigeria or Africa as a continent or themselves doesn't have to be fixed. So that's all I'll say.
Can I pause for just a second to say, I would like to say, for those of you who teach in public schools who don't have this kind of resources, my office, which is one of the Title VI centers, the Center for African Studies, there are other centers for African Studies across the country. Part of what I sometimes do is I will use my funding to pay for an artist or an author or something like that to speak to a class or do something along those lines in a school that doesn't have the resources to do it. And so if you are thinking and you have found a person, but you don't want to ask them to work for you for free, as one ought not, reach out to your Center for African Studies if you have a Title VI one. And I'll put in the link, the outreach site, which lists all of us, because I think that's something that might be feasible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And then another text we actually read this earlier on, so this isn't exactly in the order, but this is Looking for a Trans Wonderland by Nu Sarawiwa, who, if you don't know who that is the daughter of a very famous Nigerian activist who was actually executed by the Nigerian government. And it's a travel guide, but it's almost this rich, magical exploration, almost more than travel guide. So we start there so our students can start to get grounded in different spaces and places in Nigeria, while still also hearing from Sarawiwa about her own experience or her own complicated relationship with the country. So now let's get into some contemporary Nigerian novels, and then we'll talk about assignments.
Lingerr is hustling me through this because this is one of the big projects we lost in the pandemic world, but I think it will come back. So you'll notice this is 6 different novels, and what we did was actually, at this certain point in the course, I think it was probably 2/3 through, Amanda, you can tell me if that's right. We let students, we created this sort of create your own adventure, and students chose one of these novels to read in a smaller group with a couple of other people. And, I can't sell this enough. I think we all know as teachers that student choice is a huge part of student engagement. This covered a whole range of topics and sort of identities of the characters and of the writers. I actually think if we were to do this again, I would make a pitch that Freshwater would be something we would all read. So these 6 novels ended up being this incredible kind of just really wonderful generative space for students to dive into a direction they wanted to go with each other. There was a lot of conversation across groups about, who had which novel, what they were learning. So it also was a way to kind of share more information than we could have if we were all reading The Fisherman or we were all reading Welcome to Lagos. So I would say the other thing I would say is just that, when we teach this again, none of those novels may be on the list, and maybe a totally new list of 6 new novels. But that, for me, teaching this the second time was a hugely successful and exciting and really invigorating part of the course.
I think too, and I just want to add very quickly, yes, there'll be so many new novels to add to this. And this really resists the urban ethos of depth over breadth in an important way, is we really needed the kids to see how much trouble we were having fitting all the good literature into the course, and encouraging them to switch books with one another afterwards was really important. And it leads to our assignments. And we have many. And again, I want to express that this is over 3 different iterations. So some of these we still do and don't do. What I want to talk about in terms of all of these are all links. So after this presentation, you'll be able to look more closely at any of them. But I wanted to give a little overview in terms of like what the student skills are, or what we're hoping for. And I think the most important one, or the most exciting one, that builds on what Courtney was saying in terms of what we got from Mfoniso Odofia, encouraging us to bring music and art and culture into the class, was this 5 Minutes of Nigeria project, which is where we asked everybody to take responsibility for the first 5 minutes of class and to do some cultural research, some political research, to trace something that they were interested in through the country of Nigeria. So how could we both connect to our hearts, what we were interested in, and this other country, and enrich our experience, working against any sort of ahistorical ideas, and then practicing our student research skills were super important, like connecting with student interest, working on cultural competency, knowing what makes good resources, and then also presenting. How do you get in front of the class to make that point? Was that the only one I was talking about? No, yes, because someone else is going to talk about the Things Fall Apart.
And we're going to start saying, we'll tell you very quickly, because we know we have like 18 minutes left to do a bunch of different things. Again, we're sending this to you. You can click the links, but the first Things Fall Apart piece was a more standard, almost academic analytical paper. What was exciting about it is that we'd also read some of Chinua Achebe's other writings and his musings on writing in English. And we asked students to sort of bring that into their own thinking about the novel. One of my favorite things we did was the Yam Project. I think I've developed a kind of yam obsession, or maybe it's just genetic because I'm from West Africa, but we sent students yams. Remember, we were teaching virtually at this point, and we asked them to express an idea, a response, a reaction to Things Fall Apart. We got a broad range. Students tried to cook different yam dishes with varying levels of success. We had art, we had just lots of different things. And it was a really fun example of project-based learning that we were able to bring into the course. And I'll pass it on to Courtney.
Going back to making use of whatever is happening in your environment, or it could be also virtually. We were really lucky to have Toyin Oji Odutola, this incredible artist. She had an exhibit at MOAD, and the first time we did the course, we actually were able to go, and that was part of a field trip. And this is really honestly just a pitch to check out her work. She is astounding. And other than that, I think we put this in especially just to think that there's so much out there that you can bring in, especially with digital resources. And sometimes it will tie into an in-person learning, sometimes it won't, but the kids are used to that at this point now. So the expanse is pretty exciting.
And I don't have much to say about the cultural research and context in terms of student skills that's different from the 5 Minutes of Nigeria, except that to put it in the cultural context, this was helping kids know when to not simply try to read in context, as we all know they love to do with definitions. I didn't have to look that word up. I just could guess what it meant. Like, how can we stop and hyper focus on the elements of the text that are unfamiliar to us so that we can look it up and understand what the bird is, understand what the food is. Again, working against the ahistorical notions, or just working against, oh, it's some bird, trying to make it as specific as possible to them.
And you'll know we just have an assignment attached to the book the book group, and it was a review. And I'll say a warm up was actually persuading one of your classmates that you think might like your book. And that was a warm up, and then they did a more formal book review.
And we should say we do the traditional stuff too. So you'll find in your folder that you'll get later some critical and creative writing assignments. We're not all just out there on the innovation. There was close reading. There was still the same sort of how do you integrate text? How do you integrate textual evidence? How do you write creatively? How do you write reflectively? Able to do all of the things we do in any other English class with this literature.
So we're just offering you 2 versions of ways that we've ended the course. And I think our first 2 iterations, it was a more kind of, I think, trace a vein through the literature you've read. And that I'll just name that, if you remember back to the quote Lingerr read at the beginning about the student who said, I didn't even think I wanted to take this course. I'll share that one of the finals that I received in 2019 was from one of my advisees who's a young white conservative, pretty unusual to find in San Francisco. And his reflective essay shared really similar sentiments to what you heard at the beginning. And so I think there's something about this course that actually, for people who might even want to think they're pretty set in their views, there's something about approaching something as a course that's tabula rasa, where you really know almost nothing about the material, that actually lends itself to more eye-opening. We also got an amazing, I'm thinking of like a choose your own adventure story that drew on so many, creative writing story that drew on so many of the 5 minutes of Nigeria kind of information that the student had learned. And so we have an example of a very broad, open kind of course final. And then we have one that's totally different and also awesome.
And then the one that we did last time was pretty much asking them to do what we've just explained, which is, what is a course that you would want to teach about Nigeria? So they, like we did in sort of a truncated way, looked into different texts, all kinds of texts, films, short stories, poetry, etc., and dug into what is almost a vein again, right? What's a through line that they want to teach a course on Nigeria about? So we got Afrofuturism, we got one that was more focused on House of Literature. There's a link to both prompts here, and then I also put a link to a student example of just the class that they wanted to pitch about Nigeria. And now, hopefully this all sounded really fantastic to you. Now we're going to talk about all of our different missteps and things we might do differently, or things that maybe in some ways are inevitable. And Amanda, do you want to start? Or should I start?
I'll start. We could do probably a whole presentation on missteps and not even touch the ones that we didn't even know we stepped wrongly in. I will talk about a couple of times not giving appropriate context or content warnings for students, especially even in something as innocuous as showing the trailer for the Fela Kuti documentary. It has a really vicious killing very quickly in the montage, which was challenging both to the ethos of the class, right? We were trying to resist ideas of violence, but also didn't want to expose anybody without their knowledge. So that was a big one. Also, pronunciation around names, which I think Lingerr is going to talk a little bit more about. Her excellent, especially on Zoom, she would make kids unmute. Mfonisa Odofia gave us a really helpful sort of glossary for her plays. And so going through and practicing how to pronounce everyone's name and making sure that we correct ourselves or that we pause. And I think this is important in any English class. I'm tired of students saying, the main character, the girl, but really centering the dehumanization that happens when we're not pronouncing somebody's name, and the importance of this just being a sign of respect for our characters, but also the culture.
And that's partly because my name is Lingerr Senghor and everyone says different things. An admin in Urban recently tagged me in something, it said lingerie to the whole adult community. So names really matter to me. I really just made them unmute and say them. It's nothing special. I was like, but you have to say it, because I think we evade it a lot and that doesn't seem that helpful. Another misstep, it's not a misstep, but it was really just the challenge of the times. This is in the thick of a lot of the situation around Breonna Taylor and Black Lives Matter. And some of these Nigerians that we read did live in the United States or do write stories that take place there. But regardless, I think we were still engaging with Black bodies that we saw as being visibly under threat around us all the time. And I guess the way that I handled it, at least, was we just talked about that as well. Not letting it become a single story of Black oppression, but at least naming what was happening around us, especially in a place with so much privilege. Another one that's almost just more awkward is just portraying Nigerians in art. I think students would feel like, I'm gonna draw this character and I'm gonna do that, and things would end up being a little weird. So what we really did there is ask them to steer clear of trying to represent people.
Yeah, and then the next two, I think, one is just the challenge of inclusivity. Nigeria has so many incredibly diverse groups of people. And so, for us, first, at least I think for all of us teachers, we had to even familiarize ourselves with all the available kinds of voices we might want to find. And then it's also, just like in publishing in America, not all voices are equally published and made public. So that's something we struggle with. And I think I'll just name something that happens when we're teaching all kinds of literature about non-dominant groups, that, there's a tendency that students have, they read one book and then they're generalizing, whether it's about, as Lingerr was saying to me earlier, like the village mentality of things fall apart, or if we're learning about, the way that Nigerian police are mistreating Nigerians, then, there's a narrative there that might actually, it's a probably pretty powerful narrative to have, but just that tendency that students have to generalize. And so, especially when you're have limited information that's just being presented to you in a class, we had to really work, I think, to sort of constantly be interrogating what we were then thinking was like something that we knew about Nigeria or about, any aspect of culture, which is dynamic, changing, and so complicated and layered.
So what we're going to do now, and Shane, I think we have 10 minutes. Is that correct?
So you have until, I think we have 19 minutes. Don't we go till 50?
19?
I believe.
Oh my God, that's so exciting. Okay.
I just found you additional time. Yeah, because I think we go to 5:50. So if I'm not mistaken, yeah.
Okay, I was gonna rush to the end and tell you what we would have done if we had time, like I do in all of my classes, but no, we actually have time. This is extremely exciting. So I think first of all, then, just what questions do you have for us? Any questions, any comments? I'll stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other, so I can see all the Ben Austins and my mom, who I now see here. But any questions, comments, you can send it to the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask.
I have a question I've been sitting on for a minute, and I'm going to ask you while other people get themselves together. I'm curious about, so in the course of like trying to figure out what we're doing for the, the various sessions for this program, I spent some time looking at online zines published mostly within Africa, one here in the US, of new fiction. And I was just curious what, if you feel like it makes sense to incorporate that into a class, if you did, how you would, or if it's, new fiction, of course, some of it is great and some of it is not great. So I was curious about that. We didn't end up doing that. I'm happy to share the links to them with anyone. But
I remembered looking at those zines. I mean, I think it's always important for us to be, especially in one of these classes, we do so much historical literature, talking about where that tradition ends up. And so I used a lot of, there's a wonderful chapbook series that comes out of, I think, University of Nebraska Press, that is different African poets, and it's in a little box set. So we always would try to pull something in from there. Omatara James is an American poet that I know who's got Nigerian roots, who was published in that series, and my kids loved her poems. So finding through zines, bringing those into the classroom, and finding, we have these wonderful double periods where sometimes if we don't want to give kids 800 pages of homework, we're left with some time to read in class. And that would be, I can see bringing those in and thinking a little bit about how they could make connections to the rest of the literature we've read there.
Courtney, do you have a response? If not, I'm going to enter Ben Austin's question in the chat. Okay. One of the 4 remaining Ben Austins asks, if you had a recommendation for one author or text that you would include in a more traditional curriculum that doesn't support a full course on Nigerian authors, what would you say is a must read? Such a good question. So I think this is hedging it a little bit. I think it really depends on what level you're teaching. For older students, I would say there's something that's so deliciously confusing about Death and the King's Horseman. I think that you get a really strong sense of some of the effects of colonization, but also intergenerational tension and so many other things that make it, to me, a must read? I think the answer is usually Things Fall Apart, and I think that's probably my answer, but I'm trying to resist everyone only reading Things Fall Apart and thinking that that represents all of Africa. Amanda and Courtney, what do you think?
Well, I was going to say definitely King's Horseman too, just because for me that it also satisfies, reading a drama. So if we're talking about something that's a more traditional curriculum, I think it hits a few more of those student skill sets than a novel does. And I also just want to recognize that if you're teaching students who want to be reading contemporary literature, Half a Yellow Sun is a great text to, again, provide that historical context to Biafra. And then it offers students of so many different levels a buy-in. There's the romantic story, there's the story between sisters. So I think all of those, and then I'm seeing Jeffrey, I can't read that whole comment while I'm talking, but I see short fiction. Like for me, that's the other place to bring it in. Bringing in, the Adichie stories are so great, and there are one or two Safiata stories that will always be with our course, but finding those little moments of connection.
I'll go a little rogue, and I say this knowing that actually, like, if you teach in a setting that's pretty conservative, you probably couldn't get away with teaching Freshwater. But Freshwater by Achebe and Ngozie is a really, just to me, actually one of the most powerful pieces of fiction I've read in the last couple of years. And looks at mental health, looks at the experience of non-binary, a kind of journey along gender and identity, and also is a kind of incredible, and I think especially for Western readers like me, spiritual journey into this question of orishas and belief, and inhabiting your belief in a way that doesn't fit into, I think, most of the ways novels represent represent spirituality. So I will say, like, it's a stretch, but for the students who read it, and for myself and a lot of people who, to me, it's actually like, it's time to get beyond some of these traditional curriculum if we can. And so that, to me, it would be a great opportunity.
Courtney, can I ask you, so I loved Freshwater, but was hesitant to teach it to students, but I found that it was really helpful to have read Things Fall Apart before reading Freshwater. Like I feel like everything just keeps coming back to Things Fall Apart, as much as I want to resist that gravitational pull. I don't know.
I actually think you could do with that Things Fall Apart. I think it would become a really different read. It might be a read that actually allowed students to connect with it on a more personal level. If you're not actually trying to read it through the lens of Things Fall Apart, it kind of gets bigger, I think, and more intimate and more powerful, and also maybe more challenging, I would just say. Yeah.
But I would say, so Courtney feels much more comfortable teaching. That book was a struggle for me with my students. And for me, it's the Ogbanji too, that's what I needed to go back to Things Fall Apart for, to put that whole sort of way that character is constructing identity around the idea of the Ogbanji. I needed to go back to Things Fall Apart for that one. And I found with my students, but that, you did say you were going rogue, Courtney, and that's very rogue, but I love it.
If we have another minute, I have another question. And that is, I am curious, like, how the course changed when you did the third iteration where Lingerr was helping to teach, and I realize you're not Nigerian, but your Nigerian
so many uncles though, and
I know, exactly.
Can support
and so
that.
I guess I'm curious about that, because not everyone who decides to do this course is going to have someone from the Gambia show up and teach with them 1 year. And I guess I'm wondering, like, how did the course change? Do you think, not just because you're a third teacher and any teacher taking on a course is going to alter it, one hopes, but also because you're bringing a different knowledge set to the table?
It's hard for me to figure out how the course changed a little bit, because I've only ever experienced the way it was. So Amanda, you go first, and then I'll talk about how I feel.
I mean, I would say for me, it made the course riskier in the best ways. That Lingerr, and it's hard for me to separate what is amazing about her as a teacher from what is Gambian about her. So that might be part of it. But I think that, the YAN project and the project-based learning, I might have worried a little bit more about my positionality without a partner who was willing to sort of push that and test that. But I think that was, we got riskier with the kids. And I felt like I always had, we didn't team teach, we weren't in the same classroom, but a lot of times our weekly collaboration meetings, I would come away with some gem, either from Lingerr or her uncles, who were very much a part of our course. And it was, again, that proximity. So in the same way that I was bringing Rotimi into my classroom or Mfoniso into my classroom, I was regularly saying, well, Lingerr told me this story. And it was, as close to a primary source that I could have. We talked about the jollof rice. I thought I had solved jollof rice. I thought we understood that it was Nigerian, and to be able to, correct myself with her very strong opinions in the class, it was just, that to me was, and I guess that's not really talking about curricularly what changed, but I think that pulling us into riskier endeavors and giving us more permission to bring our positionality into the classroom, I definitely felt that.
And since this is going to be one of the few spaces in anyone's life where there are more Gambians than Nigerians in a room, let all the Gambians in the room just vote. Jollof rice is called Benachin, and it's from the Gambia and Senegal. But I think part of me, I really appreciate what you said, Amanda. I'm also, of course, not an expert in anything about Nigeria or even Gambia or anything about Africa, but I think what mattered to me and hopefully mattered to my students is this sense of proximity. It didn't feel like everything was so far away to me because I have relatives from this place, or I'm from a place that is not very similar, but is somewhat similar. I'm also from a place that was colonized by the British, right? All of these different things, I think hopefully maybe made it feel more real to them, and at least made the course feel more real to me as I taught it. And then we have a question from Morgan King, who is not my best friend. She's just some stranger, that says, I love the syllabus writing final assignment. I'm curious, did you get any ideas from the student submissions? Yes, so many, honestly. It's going to make it even harder to teach this course because, especially with some of the Afrofuturism stuff that we didn't really get into because we have another class that's about sci-fi and dystopia. But so many poets I'd never heard of, so many movies I haven't seen. Amanda and Courtney, anything to add? So many ideas.
I would only add that I think it's a good final for almost any course to really learn it was a great tool for me to reflect on what was the most effective part of the course I had just taught them. So being able to see them bring in certain exercises or certain approaches as part of what they wanted to center their curriculum around was really either affirming or noticing something I'd spent a lot of time on that they weren't trying to imitate in their course was actually maybe helpful for me in this next iteration. That this iterative idea of the ways in which we change every single time we teach this was really deepened and enriched with their input, as opposed to just the surveys. The surveys that we always give our students at the end were helpful, but actually seeing how they would choose to teach helped me understand how they want to learn.
And I think we maybe have time. Do you have time for any more questions, Shane?
I think we have time for one more, and then
okay,
because we've got 5 minutes-ish.
Before we start dancing?
Yeah, before we start, we have 5 minutes, then you have a break so you can stretch before we start dancing. Yeah.
So just so you all know, this is what we were going to do, but at least to me, it feels richer for us to just continue talking, but know that we're resources should you want to do that. So we're going to have you all get into breakout rooms and make a plan for yourself. What's a course that you could imagine replacing with Nigerian literature? What's a text you could replace with something that we've named, which you already had as a question? And then our information is on this. You can contact us at any time if you're thinking about doing anything like this. We're very happy to work with you. I say volunteering my colleagues without asking them. I am very happy to work with you. But any final questions before we go? Or ideas that resonated or thoughts you had?
Go ahead, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say, like, all day I've been waiting for this workshop, for this presentation, and it did not disappoint. Thank you.
Oh my God.
So much. This was amazing. So thank you.
Oh my God. Thank you.
I learned a lot. I just love that you're out there doing this. Earlier on, I know that Amanda and Courtney had said something about they know they're not the perfect people to be teaching this, but they feel a responsibility, and that sense of, responsibility over, you know, maybe not being the best people to teach that. And I feel that all the time teaching West African Lit. I'm like, who the heck am I to be teaching this class? But I'm, you know, that helped me a lot. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I just love everything you're doing. I can't wait to get my hands on your slideshow and look at all your projects. And yeah, so thank you. This has been amazing.
Thank you. They've also both been sent to the chat. At some point, I think Shane might be able to send them out or link them, but if you want to open them up right now before you leave, you can just click that link.
Awesome.
And really do be in touch with us. We're happy to. I mean, we could not have made this class without so much input from other people, and really feel that responsibility is also about putting that forward into your schools.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have a final? We will add resources to the website, but in the interim, because it takes a little while for that to happen, if you want to have access to this, I strongly recommend you copy it out of the chat so that you have sooner access. Any final questions? Okay.
Can I give a shout out just to Shane for having us? And this,
Yeah.
I didn't, unlike maybe all of you, I didn't know about this whole amazing weekday experience organization, and I'm just blown away, and I can't wait to sign up for next year. And to Lingerr and Amanda for letting me be part of this. I'm just so grateful. It's just, and to all of you for showing up. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm very happy that you ladies, you women were willing and available to do this. It's really very much appreciated. Okay.
Well, thanks to all of you. Thank you all for being here. I know it's been a long day.
Thank you for being here.
Lingerr has to change her pants before she dances. Is what I hear.
You made that sound so weird, Amanda. Oh my God.
No, I just meant you can't wear sweatpants to dance in.
I assume she was dressed beautifully on the bottom, just like on the top. Sweatpants.
Massive sweatpants.
Who on earth would wear sweatpants on Zoom? All right. Yeah, me too. Okay, well, thank you everyone. And I hope we see you back in the main room at 6 o'clock for our conversation about Jerusalem and dance tutorial. Jeffrey says pants ? And I think that's a note on which to end.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.